They didn't just ignore me. They looked right through me, like I was invisible, like my whole life meant nothing to them. My son's wife, with her perfectly manicured nails and designer dress, smirked at me as if I didn't belong in the same room. And her family? Arrogant, rich, and convinced they were better than anyone else, including me. That's when I realized this Christmas party wouldn't be about joy or family, it would be about humiliation. I'm an American woman who's always lived a humble, quiet life. I've worked hard, raised my family, and believed in kindness over flash. But marrying into wealth hasn't been easy for my son. Or for me. His wife, she sees my humility as weakness. Every glance, every comment at these gatherings feels like a test I'm doomed to fail. This year I was dreading the annual Christmas party. The tension was already thick in the air, and I knew they'd find some way to make me feel small. Yet little did I know, a simple choice, an act of kindness I would make on my way to that party, would set off a chain of events no one expected. That act would change everything, and completely turn the tables on the family that thought they had me figured out. By the end of this story, you'll see exactly why humility, patience, and doing the right thing, even when it seems inconvenient, can be the most powerful form of revenge. I started the drive to the Christmas party with a sinking feeling in my chest. The sky was already dimming, a dull gray that matched the heaviness in my heart. I gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual, trying to focus on the road, but my mind kept drifting to what awaited me. My son's wife. Her smug, condescending smile haunted me. Every time I imagined her glancing at me, my stomach twisted. And her family. Oh, her family. Rich, polished, and utterly convinced they were better than anyone else in the room. I knew what they would say. I could practically hear the sharp whispers before I even arrived. Comments about my modest car, my plain outfit, my quiet demeanor. I wasn't naive. I understood the world I had married into, or rather the world my son had married into. And yet, I told myself to stay calm, to keep my composure. I would not let them see me flinch. As I drove, I tried to shake off the nerves. I took a deep breath, glancing at the rearview mirror. The streetlights blurred against the windshield, streaks of gold and silver. My mind wandered, remembering past parties, past jabs. Each one felt like a small cut, invisible to anyone else but leaving a sting that lingered for days. I forced myself to focus on the present. Tonight, I reminded myself, I would endure. I had no choice but to endure. Then I saw her. A woman, stranded on the side of the road, hunched over the hood of a car that clearly wasn't going anywhere anytime soon. I slowed, my curiosity and concern instantly overriding my anxiety about the party. She looked frustrated, flustered, and utterly helpless. My first thought was about the time. I was already running late, and I knew the party wouldn't wait for me. But something in me couldn't just drive past. I pulled over and parked a safe distance behind her car. My heart was still racing from nerves, but now it mixed with another emotion, compassion. I grabbed my coat and approached carefully, giving her a warm, gentle smile. "Hi," I said softly, trying to sound casual. "Do you need some help?" She looked up at me, startled, and then relief washed over her face. "Oh, thank God," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know what's wrong with it. It just stopped." I nodded. "Let's take a look," I said. "Maybe I can help." As I opened the hood, my hands grew a little cold from the crisp winter air, but my determination warmed me. I had done my best to stay composed for decades, but this, helping someone in need, it felt good. It reminded me of who I truly was, someone who tried to do the right thing even when it was inconvenient. I wasn't just the woman they would mock later. I was still me. Her car had some issue with the engine, something I wasn't entirely sure I could fix, but I did what I could. I checked the battery, looked at the fluid levels, and even gave it a little nudge here and there. The woman watched nervously, wringing her hands, and I realized how powerless she must have felt. And yet she trusted me. While I worked, my mind drifted back to the party. I imagined arriving late, possibly dirty from standing out in the cold while helping her. My son's wife would likely roll her eyes, whisper to her mother, maybe even outright tell me I didn't belong. I felt a pang of anxiety, but even as that fear loomed, I refused to leave the woman in trouble. I couldn't. Something inside me demanded I stay. She sighed in relief as the car finally sputtered back to life. I smiled, a quiet, almost private victory. "Try it now," I said. She turned the key and the engine roared to life. She threw her hands up in triumph, almost in disbelief. "You're amazing," she said, laughing through her tears of relief. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't stopped." I shrugged, a modest gesture. "I just did what anyone would do," I said. But inside I felt something stir, a subtle sense that this encounter wasn't random. There was a reason our paths crossed today, though I had no idea what it could be. I glanced at my watch. Panic tickled at the edges of my mind. I was running late, and the party waited for no one. But as I looked at her, smiling now with confidence, I realized I wasn't thinking about the party anymore. For the first time that day, I felt a sense of clarity. I had done the right thing, and nothing anyone at that party could say or do would erase that. "Thank you," she said again. "I can't tell you how much this means." I waved her off gently. "It's no problem, just glad I could help." As I got back into my car, a mixture of relief and lingering anxiety settled over me. I started the engine, preparing to head to the party, my mind a whirlwind. Would this moment matter later? Would helping her have consequences I couldn't yet see? There was a sense, a subtle hint of suspense, that this simple act of kindness might change everything at that party, maybe even more than I could imagine, and so I drove on, heart racing, mind alert, fully aware that tonight, everything could shift in a way no one expected. The cold night air rushed past my window as I thought about the son I loved, the family I was entering, and the lesson I hoped would unfold. One act of compassion, one small choice, could it really tip the scales? I didn't know, but I had made my choice. And sometimes I realized that's all it takes to start a chain of events that no one sees coming. I drove the last few blocks to the party, my heart pounding in my chest. My hands were still cold from helping that woman on the roadside, my coat slightly wrinkled and my hair tousled by the wind. I knew I was going to be late, and I knew that arriving like this would make me an easy target for ridicule, but I couldn't bring myself to regret it. My conscience was clear, my choice made. As I pulled into the driveway, I could already see them, the lights glinting off the expensive cars, the perfectly manicured garden, the laughter spilling out from inside the house. My stomach tightened. Inside, I could already hear the whispers, the judgmental glances that would follow me the moment I stepped through the door. I took a deep breath, straightened my back, and opened the car door. My shoes crunched against the driveway gravel as I walked up the steps, my coat speckled with mud from the roadside. The door swung open before I even knocked. "Finally," my son's wife said, her voice dripping with faux patience. "I was beginning to think you wouldn't come at all." I smiled politely, forcing calm over the surge of anxiety I felt. "I'm here," I said quietly. Her eyes flicked to my coat, my hair, my slightly smudged shoes. I could practically hear her thoughts. "Look at her. She doesn't even try." Her mother, standing just behind her, tisked and raised a perfectly arched eyebrow. The other family members were smirking now, whispering behind their hands. Every movement, every glance was designed to belittle me, to make me feel small. I felt my cheeks warm, but I refused to shrink. I had endured so many subtle humiliations over the years that this, no matter how sharp, felt familiar. I straightened my shoulders, held my chin high, and walked inside. "Oh, we'd prefer if you left," my son's wife said, loud enough for the other guests to hear. Her voice was clipped, deliberate, cruel. "This isn't really your kind of party." I paused, looking around at the gathered crowd. Some of the guests were polite, smiling awkwardly, unsure how to react. Others, wealthy friends of the family, clearly enjoyed the drama, leaning in to watch me squirm. I could feel the weight of their judgment, a pressure meant to crush me, to make me apologize for existing in this space. But I didn't move. I stayed calm. I took a deep, steadying breath. Inside, I reminded myself of something important. My worth is not determined by their approval. My pride, my choices, my integrity, they could never take those from me. I knelt briefly to adjust my coat, as though I were oblivious to their mockery, and then stood again. "I've come to celebrate with family," I said, my voice calm but firm. "If that's not acceptable, then that's your choice." There was a moment of silence, sharp and tense. The laughter that had bubbled behind their lips faltered, and I felt a quiet thrill of satisfaction. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to defend myself with words. My composure was the statement. My presence alone challenged their arrogance. Her father, a tall man with a perfectly trimmed beard, sneered, "Do you even understand what it takes to be part of this world? Perhaps humility is admirable, but it's insufficient." I smiled politely, letting his words wash over me. I imagined them as raindrops sliding off my coat. Inside, I felt a quiet power. Every humiliation they tried to heap on me was temporary. Every sly comment or side glance would not break me. I had survived worse, endured far more, and I knew the night was far from over. The room smelled of roasted meats, pine, and expensive perfumes, a stark contrast to my simple coat, my modest appearance. But I reminded myself that scent, appearance, wealth, these were trivial things. They might impress others, they might intimidate, but they did not define reality. "I'm happy to stand here," I continued softly, "even if it's inconvenient for some." My voice had a calm authority now, the kind that doesn't shout but commands attention. Some of the guests turned their eyes to me, surprised by my unshakable composure. Others whispered to each other, confused by the lack of reaction I had given. Her mother stepped closer, her face tightening. "We just think it would be better if you left. For everyone's sake," she said, her tone laced with thinly veiled contempt. I tilted my head slightly, maintaining eye contact, a gentle smile on my lips. "If you feel that way, that's your decision. But I am here, and I will not let the opinions of others diminish who I am." The tension in the room was palpable. Guests shuffled uncomfortably, unsure whether to intervene, unsure whether to side with the wealthy family or silently admire the quiet dignity with which I carried myself. I could see the ripple of whispers as I moved through the room, a storm of judgment brushing against me, and yet I remained steady, calm, composed. My thoughts drifted briefly back to the woman on the roadside, to the act of kindness that delayed me, that left me messy and late. I realized that helping her, despite the immediate consequences, had strengthened me in ways I hadn't anticipated. I had chosen integrity over fear, compassion over convenience, and that strength carried me now through the mockery, through the subtle attacks, and through the arrogance of the rich family. I walked toward the living room, slowly, deliberately, feeling each step as a quiet declaration. I would not shrink. I would not apologize for being me. I would endure, and in that endurance, I would find my own quiet victory. As I positioned myself in the corner, observing the rich family's smug expressions, I felt a seed of anticipation. They had believed their insults and judgment could unsettle me, could make me leave. But I had remained. I had faced the humiliation, taken it calmly, and in doing so, I realized patience, inner strength, and quiet pride are far more powerful than they will ever know. I glanced at the other guests again, noting their sympathetic glances, their surprise, their admiration hidden behind polite smiles. My presence, unshaken and dignified, had already begun to shift the energy in the room. The arrogance of my son's wife and her family would not go unchallenged, but not with confrontation, not with anger, and certainly not with loud words. My strength was quieter than that. Tonight, I would endure. Tonight, I would watch. And tonight, patience and composure would become my weapons. I stood in the corner of the brightly lit living room, my posture calm, my hands folded neatly in front of me. The room buzzed with chatter, the clinking of glasses, the soft crackle of the fireplace. The Christmas tree glittered with lights, ornaments perfectly spaced, every decoration arranged with meticulous precision, a clear reflection of the wealth and obsession with appearances that defined this family. But beneath all the sparkle, I could see the cracks, the arrogance, the selfishness, the entitlement. I watched them, carefully, quietly, as though observing a play I had already read the script for. Each laugh, each glance, each subtle smirk revealed more than they intended. They were so focused on themselves, so convinced of their superiority that they didn't even notice the quiet power in the room. The power that wasn't measured in wealth or status, but in integrity, patience, and observation. My son's wife floated through the crowd, her heels clicking against the polished floor, perfectly composed, yet perfectly cruel. She stopped at the bar and whispered something to her father, a man with an expensive suit and a smug expression, and both of them turned to glance at me. I felt the gaze of their judgment, the silent assessment that I was inadequate, unworthy, invisible. Yet I remained still, calm, letting their arrogance roll off me like water off a duck's back. I observed her mother engaging other guests, showing them expensive gifts, pointing out exotic vacations she had funded, subtly reminding everyone of her status. She laughed at jokes I didn't understand, jokes at my expense, and I felt the sting of disappointment. But I also felt something else. Clarity. I was learning, absorbing, noting patterns and weaknesses, understanding exactly how they operated. Their arrogance was a map, their greed a guide. At one point, her brother entered the room, carrying a rare bottle of wine. He loudly described its value, its vintage, and the price he had paid, as if the worth of a person could be measured in dollars and cents. Guests nodded, feigning interest, and I realized how shallow this world really was. They were so obsessed with appearances that they couldn't see the truth. Character, kindness, and patience were far more valuable than anything they could buy. I noticed small, telling interactions. A server tripped slightly, spilling a drink, and her mother barely glanced at him before turning away, unconcerned. A guest complimented her son's wife on her new jewelry, and she barely acknowledged it, clearly taking pleasure in the power of her beauty and status. Each moment, each subtle act, built a portrait of a family consumed by themselves, blind to humility and dismissive of anyone who didn't meet their inflated standards. As I watched, a mixture of emotions surged inside me. Disappointment, certainly. Hurt, absolutely. The sting of knowing that my own child, my son, was a part of this, that he had married into a family so removed from simple human decency. It was painful. Yet, amidst the hurt, I felt something else, something far more potent. Strategic thinking. My mind worked quietly, plotting, analyzing, considering. If their arrogance was so pronounced, if their vanity so glaring, then it would only be a matter of time before it became their weakness. I observed the way they interacted with each other, the subtle jabs, the thinly veiled competitiveness, the desperate need for approval from one another. It was a performance, a constant attempt to outshine each other, to assert dominance. I noted who sought attention, who thrived on power, who was easily flustered. I was cataloging their flaws, their predictable behaviors, storing each moment away for the day when it might matter. My disappointment at their greed and selfishness was tempered by an unexpected satisfaction. I realized that arrogance often carries its own consequences. Those who believe themselves untouchable, who underestimate others, are vulnerable in ways they cannot see. And I, quiet and seemingly powerless, was in the perfect position to witness it all, to understand it all, and to wait. A particularly telling moment occurred when her father dismissed a guest who disagreed with him, waving them off with a hand that seemed to say, "You don't belong here and you never will." The guest hesitated, embarrassed, retreating into silence. I felt a pang of sadness for the cruelty, but also an inner strengthening. I had no desire to humiliate anyone in this way. My patience, my moral clarity was my power. And unlike them, it was unshakable. I glanced around the room, noting small but significant details. The way the youngest son of the family fidgeted nervously when corrected, the way her cousin tried too hard to impress, the way everyone seemed to orbit the rich family like planets around a sun. They were the center of their universe, but that center was fragile, dependent entirely on perception and fear. That fragility was invisible to them, but I could see it. As the night progressed, I felt a subtle tension building. I didn't know exactly how it would manifest or when, but a sense of anticipation grew inside me. Something was coming, something that would shift the balance, something that would reveal that wealth and arrogance are never absolute. It might be small, it might be subtle, but the moment was approaching. I could feel it. Even as they laughed, gestured, and flaunted their status, I felt a quiet thrill at the thought that the story was not over. Their arrogance, their self-importance, their obsession with appearances, it all set the stage for what was to come, and I, standing quietly in the corner, observing, absorbing, learning, was ready. I thought briefly of the woman I had helped earlier on the road, and a small, almost imperceptible smile touched my lips. Fate, it seemed, had a way of weaving strange threads together. Perhaps the night would not be as simple as it appeared. Perhaps the arrogance of this family, so brazen and unrelenting, would be their undoing. I took another deep breath, steadying myself. My feelings were a mix of disappointment, sadness, and quiet satisfaction. I mourned the absence of humility in this room, but I also understood the advantage of witnessing it firsthand. Knowledge, I realized, was power, and I was learning more than anyone else in the room could imagine. And as the clock ticked forward, I could feel the anticipation building. A turning point was coming, though I didn't yet know exactly when or how. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Tonight, patience, observation, and quiet strength would matter far more than any display of wealth or arrogance. I positioned myself near the window, looking out at the dark winter night, letting my calm exterior mask the quiet storm of thoughts inside. Every laugh, every judgmental glance, every arrogant gesture was a piece of the puzzle, and I, undisturbed, would see it all unfold. Tonight was not just a party. It was a lesson, a test, a stage, and I, though humble, though quiet, was ready to play my part, with strategy, with patience, and with the understanding that something, or someone, would shift the balance before the night was over. I leaned back slightly, taking in the room one more time. Their arrogance, their greed, their self-importance, it was all laid bare for me to see. And in that observation, I found a strange satisfaction. Because I knew every act of pride, every moment of mockery, was preparing the stage for the moment when the unexpected would happen. And I would be ready. I was standing near the fireplace, my hands loosely folded, my eyes scanning the room. The rich family continued their performances of superiority, laughing and gesturing with such conviction that it seemed nothing could shake them. Yet in the back of my mind, I felt a quiet, almost imperceptible anticipation, a thread of expectation that something was about to change. I didn't know how or when, but the night was far from over, and my patience had taught me that the smallest details often held the greatest surprises. Then I heard the front door open. It was subtle at first, the creak of the hinges, the faint sound of boots on polished hardwood, but it immediately caught my attention. My heart skipped a beat. There was a presence in the room that I had not anticipated, yet somehow felt inevitable. I turned slightly, and there she was, the woman I had helped earlier that afternoon on the roadside. Her coat was simple, her hair slightly tousled from the winter air, but there was something about the way she carried herself that drew every eye. She walked confidently into the room, shoulders back, head held high, a calm determination in her step. The contrast between her humble appearance and the reaction she commanded was immediate and electrifying. The room froze. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Laughter faded to awkward murmurs. Guests glanced at one another, confusion etched across their faces. The Rich family's expressions shifted almost instantly, from smug confidence to surprise to a faint flicker of concern. My son's wife stiffened, her jaw tightening. Her mother's hand hovered near her pearl necklace, as if she needed reassurance that this was still under control. Even her father's smug smile faltered, replaced by a calculating, uncertain glance. They had no idea who this woman was, and that lack of knowledge terrified them in a way I found quietly satisfying. I watched her approach slowly, every movement deliberate, measured. The air seemed to thicken, charged with a strange energy. The woman glanced around, taking in the room, her gaze finally meeting mine. There was a brief moment, a subtle recognition, a silent acknowledgement of the connection we shared that afternoon. A simple act of kindness had forged a bond, and now it had arrived here, at the center of their arrogance. The guests, previously polite and polite observing, began whispering. Who is she? Why is she here? The Rich family faltered under the scrutiny of unfamiliar eyes, their confident poise cracking as they tried to assert dominance but realized they were unprepared. Their control, so meticulously maintained, was suddenly challenged. I could feel a quiet thrill building inside me, a satisfaction that was deep and unspoken. I hadn't needed to plan this, hadn't needed to manipulate the situation. The universe had orchestrated it for me. The woman's presence alone was enough to shift the room's energy. The arrogance that had seemed so untouchable was now exposed, fragile, and unsure. I reflected on the irony. All afternoon, my mind had been consumed with thoughts of humiliation and mockery, imagining the worst of this family. And yet, here was the woman I had helped. An ordinary act of kindness earlier had created an extraordinary moment now. It was almost poetic. Their wealth, their status, their carefully curated superiority meant nothing in the face of genuine human connection, genuine kindness. And I, quiet and observant, was witnessing it all unfold. Her arrival created ripples. My son's wife attempted to maintain her composure, speaking more loudly, gesturing to a nearby guest as though to reclaim attention. But it was too late. The room had shifted. Every whisper, every glance, every hesitant step the family took revealed a subtle fear, a fear born from the unknown. And that fear, though unspoken, was palpable. I noted the small details, savoring the scene. Her calm demeanor, the subtle nod she gave me, the way she smiled politely at the others without arrogance, yet with an unmistakable authority. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't demand recognition, but it was clear, unmistakable, that she mattered. And in that moment, I realized that sometimes power isn't shown through money or status. It's shown through presence, through integrity, and through quiet confidence. The Rich family was scrambling, attempting to regain control, whispering to one another in hurried, anxious tones. I could see the panic behind their eyes, the unspoken thought, "We didn't see this coming." My son's wife's hand trembled ever so slightly as she adjusted her dress. the father's face tightened, and the mother's lips pursed in disapproval. Yet all of their attempts to assert dominance were futile. The room had shifted in an instant. I felt a sense of anticipation swell inside me. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the turning point that I had only dared to imagine. And though I didn't yet know how the story would unfold, I understood one thing with absolute certainty. The balance had shifted, even if subtly. The arrogance that had seemed so unshakable was now exposed, and the woman I had helped had become the catalyst. I let myself savor the moment, though outwardly I remained calm, composed, and unshaken. My heart raced, yes, but my exterior betrayed nothing. The rich family was unsettled, the guests were intrigued, and I knew that the chain of events that would follow had begun. As she moved further into the room, I observed her interactions with others. The polite smiles, the firm handshakes, the quiet laughter. Every movement was deliberate, unassuming, yet full of impact. The family's subtle attempts to diminish her presence were ineffective. They were flustered, almost desperate. And I felt a quiet satisfaction, a sense of vindication, though no words were spoken. In that instant, I realized the truth. Humility, kindness, and patience often have power that arrogance and wealth cannot counter. The woman I had helped, a simple act of compassion hours ago, now held the room's attention without even trying. And in this realization, I felt a sense of anticipation, a thrill at the unfolding events. I could feel the tension in the room building, the atmosphere crackling with expectation. Something was about to happen, something that would challenge the family's self-perceived superiority. And I, calm and composed, was ready to witness it. The night had turned, subtly but irrevocably, and the moment of change, the moment that would expose the truth, was only beginning. As she glanced around, her eyes landing briefly on me once more, I understood that the stage was set. The arrogance of my son's wife and her family was now fragile, vulnerable, and I, having endured their mockery, having maintained my dignity and patience, could finally see the beginning of the shift. The whispers grew louder, the family's composure waned, and the guests leaned forward, captivated by this unexpected presence. The woman I had helped had arrived, and with her, the dynamic of the room had changed. Their superiority, once unquestioned, was now uncertain. Their arrogance, once a shield, was now brittle and exposed. And in that quiet, powerful moment, I felt the thrill of anticipation. The knowledge that patience, kindness, and quiet observation had brought me to this point. The night was far from over, and yet the first threads of justice, subtle yet undeniable, were already weaving themselves into the fabric of this party. I allowed a small, satisfied smile to touch my lips. The moment had arrived. The surprise of the evening was here. And I, standing calmly in the corner, understood that what had begun as a simple act of kindness on the roadside was about to become something far greater than anyone could have imagined. The room was still buzzing with whispers, but now the energy had shifted. Where once arrogance and superiority had ruled, a subtle tension had taken hold. The woman I had helped earlier, the same stranger whose car had broken down on the roadside, was no longer just a guest. She had become the center of attention, the pivot on which the evening now turned. And the rich family, so accustomed to controlling every glance, every conversation, every gesture, had no idea what was about to unfold. I watched my son's wife first. Her smirk, that arrogant curve of her lips, faltered. She had expected me to arrive late, humiliated, an easy target to mock. She had not anticipated this woman, this unknown, humble stranger, commanding attention simply by being present. My son's wife's gaze flicked nervously from me to the woman, then back again, as though seeking an explanation that didn't exist. Her mother's posture stiffened, a hand hovering near her perfectly polished jewelry as if it could somehow ward off the growing tension. Her father, once so confident, now looked unsettled, eyes darting, lips pressing together in thin lines. I could see it all in detail, the uncertainty creeping in, the cracks forming in their carefully constructed facade. The woman moved with quiet purpose. She spoke to a few guests, her voice calm but carrying weight, her manner composed but authoritative. And that's when it happened. The rich family realized, truly realized, that she was no ordinary guest. She had connections, influence, a presence that commanded respect far beyond the superficiality of this party. Gasps fluttered through the room as they began to understand the implications. Whispers turned to hurried conversations behind hands, a desperate attempt to regain footing. My son's wife tried to maintain control, raising her voice slightly, attempting to distract the room with chatter and laughter, but it was futile. Every word she uttered, every gesture she made fell flat against the quiet authority of the woman I had helped. I felt a thrill, a subtle yet potent sense of satisfaction. Karma, in its quiet, patient way, had begun to make itself known. The very arrogance and cruelty that had been used to humiliate me hours earlier now became the rich family's undoing. Their laughter, their superiority, their smug commentary, it all backfired, ricocheting against walls of humility and grace that no wealth could penetrate. I observed their reactions closely. My son's wife's hands trembled ever so slightly, hidden behind a glass of wine. Her mother's gaze darted nervously toward the door, as if contemplating escape. Even her father, the patriarch of their carefully curated empire, looked lost, unsure how to regain control of a situation that had slipped from his grasp. And in that moment, I realized something profound. Humility and quiet kindness, when met with arrogance, carry a force far stronger than brute confidence or wealth. The guests, too, began to see the shift. Polite murmurs and sympathetic glances toward me and the woman replaced the previous whispers of mockery. Some leaned forward, curious to witness the unraveling of a family so certain of their superiority. Others exchanged looks that spoke volumes, admiration for composure, respect for patience, awe at the quiet power of observation. I took a slow breath, feeling the satisfaction settle deep within me. My patience, my endurance, my choice to remain calm and composed had positioned me to witness this moment unfold. And the woman I had helped? She had become the instrument through which balance was restored, subtly yet decisively. The moment of truth arrived quietly but decisively. A conversation between the woman and a guest revealed her influence, her ability to connect powerful people, her authority in matters that the rich family had assumed they controlled entirely. Eyes widened, jaws tightened, and I watched as realization dawned on them. Their arrogance, so carefully maintained for years, was shattered in an instant. The apologies began next, awkward and hesitant. My son's wife tried to smile, attempting to mask embarrassment with false cheer. Her words stumbled over themselves. I didn't realize. We didn't. Her mother's voice was equally uncertain, stammering through half-formed phrases. Even the father, usually composed, cleared his throat and muttered, "We should have been more considerate." But the sincerity was lacking, the timing off. Too little, too late. The room had shifted irreversibly. I felt a quiet triumph settle over me. Not loud, not boastful, but undeniable. The arrogance and cruelty that had been aimed at me had found its mirror, reflected back upon the family who had wielded it so freely. And it had consequences. The lesson was delivered not with confrontation, not with anger, but with the patient, unwavering power of integrity and compassion. I reflected on the dynamics unfolding before me. The family, previously untouchable in their world of wealth and pride, now faced the reality of humility's quiet victory. The balance of power had shifted, subtly yet irrevocably. Relationships strained under the weight of the revelation, and I noted the tension as it rippled through their connections. My son, caught between his wife and his mother, seemed uncertain for the first time in years, as if the ground beneath him had shifted. Meanwhile, the guests continued to observe, some whispering in quiet awe, others nodding in approval at the subtle justice unfolding. I felt a deep sense of satisfaction not just for myself, but for the reminder it offered to everyone in the room. Kindness, patience, and humility endure. Arrogance and wealth, no matter how flaunted, are fragile. As the evening progressed, I remained calm, watching the aftershocks of the encounter ripple through the room. I could see the recalibration of interactions, the cautious glances, the quieter voices, the nervous laughter from those who had once wielded authority without challenge. The family's superiority was fractured, their pride subdued, and the quiet power of observation and integrity had proven stronger than anything money could buy. I allowed myself a small smile, savoring the moment. I had endured humiliation, faced mockery, and remained composed when every instinct screamed to react. And now, the universe had delivered a subtle yet undeniable triumph. The woman I had helped, an act of kindness hours earlier, had become the instrument of justice. Karma, in its patient and perfect timing, had taken its course. I felt a profound clarity settle over me. This was more than a simple victory. It was a lesson in human nature, a testament to the enduring strength of humility and patience. The rich family had learned, in their own way, that arrogance and cruelty carry consequences. And I, quietly and confidently, had witnessed it all unfold, without a single raised voice, without confrontation, only observation and integrity. By the time the party began to return to a semblance of normalcy, the atmosphere had shifted completely. The rich family no longer dominated the room with the same certainty. Their arrogance had been tempered, their self-importance checked, and relationships subtly, irrevocably altered. My son's wife, once so certain of her superiority, now approached me with a polite, hesitant nod. Her father avoided my gaze entirely, and I realized that the quiet triumph of humility, patience, and kindness had rewritten the rules of the evening. As I looked around the room, observing the subtle recalibration of social dynamics, I understood one undeniable truth. The choices we make, even the small ones, the acts of kindness, the moments of patience, carry power beyond our imagination. That afternoon, helping a stranger on the roadside seemed inconsequential. Tonight it had become the fulcrum on which an entire world of arrogance was shifted. I took another deep breath, feeling a sense of peace and quiet satisfaction. The rich family had been humbled, the lesson delivered, and my own dignity remained intact. In this room of glittering wealth and whispered judgments, kindness and humility had won, not with loud confrontation, not with revenge, but with subtle, undeniable grace. And as the night continued, I allowed myself to reflect. The dynamics had shifted. The family had been reminded of their place, and the power of quiet observation, patience, and integrity had never been more clear. The story of this evening would linger in the minds of those present, a reminder that arrogance is fragile, and that true strength is found not in wealth but in character. As the night drew to a close, I stood quietly, watching the party wind down. The laughter was softer now, the arrogance tempered, and the rich family seemed smaller in their own eyes than they had hours ago. I realized something profound. Wealth and status, no matter how dazzling, are fragile. They can impress, intimidate, or even belittle, but they can never replace humility, patience, and compassion. Tonight had taught me a lesson I already knew deep down, but one that was now undeniable. True strength isn't loud, and victory doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's quiet. It's the choice to help someone in need, even when inconvenient. It's the courage to stay composed in the face of mockery. And it's the power of observing, waiting, and letting integrity do its work. I thought of my son, of his wife, and of the tangled dynamics that had dominated our lives for so long. And I understood. Respect cannot be demanded, it is earned. And often it arrives when arrogance least expects it. That woman I had helped, the simple act of kindness I extended, had shifted the balance. Karma, patience, and quiet strength had played their part perfectly. As I left the party that night, I carried a deep, unspoken satisfaction. My dignity intact, my values affirmed, and my quiet strength proven. I knew that sometimes the most powerful victories are the ones no one sees coming. And in that, I found peace, pride, and the undeniable truth. Kindness and humility always triumph over arrogance and wealth.